Okay, ma'am.
Yes,
A
Yashika.
warm yes. A warm greetings to everyone. On behalf of Intandem Research Club, I welcome you all to the 14th Symposium of Intandem Research Club of the Department of English, Queen Mary's College. As the sun sets, the world of the literature opens its door. Evening is the time for real experimentation. In the quiet of evening, as the sun sets on the horizon, let our minds be illuminated by the insights of knowledge and wisdom shared tonight. Thanking the Almighty, let me introduce myself. I'm Yashiga Nandini of 2nd BA English Literature and your risk compare for this evocative evening. Connecting the dots, breaking the boundaries, addressing great challenges, bridging innovation, personal growth, or the visions of broad minded visionaries. However, not everyone share this visionary outlook. People may think, but it won't work out practically. Adopting empathy and thinking creatively requires a diverse perspective and forward thinking vision. Taking a concern of this, we have a theme based series for this academic year 2023 to 24 titled Interdisciplinary Literary Studies. Let me mention a quote here. Sociology is a science with the largest domain of subject matter. Its subject matters in human interaction within the context of human society, says William Julius Wilson. Indeed, the supernova human mind facilitates communication, which turns into relationships and stepping in the formation of social communities. In the end, these interactions are immortalized in history, what we define as literature. Now, by announcing today's topic for symposium, literature and sociology, let me welcome our great keynote speakers and paper presenters. Dr. Shoma Choudhury Lahiri, the keynote speaker, teaches sociology at St. Xavier's College, Kolkata. Her research interests are in the field of social movements, sociology of science and technology, sociology of environment, citizenship, and in qualitative methods of social research. She has published articles and book chapters in journals and books. Next, Dr. Nilanjan Chakraborty, the keynote speaker, Assistant Professor of English, Panchla Mahavidyalaya, and visiting faculty in the PG Department of English in Women's College, Calcutta. He published a monograph, articles on various aspects of post-colonial fiction and theory. Recently, he has been invited to join a workshop with Homi Baba by the ICSI New York, USA. We are all pleased to welcome you all, sir and ma'am. And let me welcome the paper presenter, Dr. Prabhat Jha, the assistant professor in the Department of English at Patna Women's College, Patna University. He has completed his PhD from Patna University on the topic Conflict Resolution in Post Independence Indian English Novels. He wrote a chapter named The Organic Intellectual and English Studies in India. He is also a poet, translator, and story writer who writes in English and Hindi. As a translator, his book Between the Two Dams has come out. He will be launching a new dam soon. We welcome you, sir.
Thank
Our today's symposium scheduled as keynote address followed by the paper presentation. So now let me invite the keynote presenters here. Thank you.
Um, I have to share my screen probably because I have a PowerPoint. Or should I mail the PowerPoint to you? What would be better?
Ma'am, you can share the screen right away. You
Okay.
That's possible in a Google Meet. There's an icon. Share screen. There's an icon with an arrow.
Yeah, I'll just do that. There is some
If you
issue.
have any problems, you can send it to us, ma'am. No problem.
Yeah, if you, it is seeking permission, but I can't seem to give permission. It says, sorry for this glitch. Can I just mail
Nancy?
it to you?
Yes, if you mail it to in tandem, Nancy will share it. Nancy, you'll share it, won't you?
Yeah.
Nancy?
Just give me a minute.
She will mail it to in tandem.
Good evening to all of you, and thank you for this opportunity to present in this forum. Uh, this is a very unusual topic for me because I'm not a specialist in sociology of literature, in the sense that I have not worked on sociology of literature, but I have done sociology with some amount of literature, which I will talk about in the presentation. Now, when one, let me set out the context first. Uh, Although literature and sociology constitute two very different order of things, yet there is an interrelationship between both these disciplines, because both relate to social reality in different ways. What is important, however, is to understand the context of the interaction between both. Now, as far as sociology is concerned, disciplinary orientations, locations, and boundaries have been of particular importance for sociology in the recent years because it finds itself amidst other social sciences. And although there was a particular context in which it grew in the West and in the Indian academia, um, in the current contemporary context, there has been a lot of changes that the discipline has had to confront. And it was felt that the discipline needed to evaluate itself as an area of study with a set of practices. It also meant that sociology had to adopt a broader view of things and establish its relation and connection with other social sciences. Uh, in fact, in the context of a growth of the world systems theory, it was necessary that sociology had to become interdisciplinary in order to survive. Now, though much desired, interdisciplinarity as a trait is something that needs to be cultivated, and it the boundaries between, although the boundaries between sociology, social anthropology, and history, and other social sciences cannot be reinforced as strongly as it had been before, that is immediately after our independence, because there has been a constant circulation of ideas amongst them. Still, interdisciplinarity becomes an important way of important disposition, important goal because of several reasons. It's because the social that we study today is not limited to disciplinary boundaries, and a multidisciplinary understanding is something which is always more desirable. Also, interdisciplinarity facilitates conversations and collaborations in the complex world that we live in, and therefore, uh, some kind of this kind of chance or conversation between disciplines is something that we need to cultivate. So the context of the interaction between sociology and literature is also very important to be noted. The other important thing that needs to be noted also is that is the method. You know, as far as the method of it is concerned, uh, sociology of literature uh, insists upon a sociology of literary practices and literary knowledge. It can be both inclusive and exclusive in the sense that it is inclusive in so far as methods intrinsic, in so far as it outlines methods that are intrinsic to a hermeneutic interpretation is amenable to the social sciences. But at the same time, it also has the potential to be exclusive because it it uses methods which are specific to a sociological understanding, which are different from the literary methods per se. So, methodologically, also, both sociology and literature are different, and a particular kind of this difference has to be understood and has to be noted in order to do sociology, in order to understand the relationship between sociology and literature. Literature is something which is uh, not defined by empiricism, whereas literature seeks to um, strengthen its own strengthen and fortify its own literariness, whereas sociology continues to remain to be defined by empiricism and to remain outside the literary fact, though both are um, sort of dealing with the social. Um, Let me go on to some of the approaches very briefly, because here what I propose to do is to look at um, the relationship between sociology and literature by looking at sociology of literature in through an example, and also look at sociology and sociology being done, doing sociology through literature. So these are the two stances that I will, two aspects that I will talk about. Before I go on to do that, I will very briefly talk about a little bit of the approach that sociology of literature takes, and that is Terry Eagleton talks about two kinds of, two ways or two forms of justification um, that exist, and which tells us about um, why an interest in sociology of literature should be justified. And he says that there are two ways. One is the realist position, and the other is the pragmatist position. While the realist position says that literature is deeply conditioned by its social context, and any critical account which omits the social context is obviously deficient. And the second is the pragmatist position, which says that literature is shaped by all kinds of factors and it is readable in all sorts of contexts. And highlighting the social determinants is useful and desirable from a particular political standpoint. So, this is one kind of an approach. The other understanding is that whether it is conditioned by a particular social context or not, whether it is readable in particular social context or not, um, what one has to understand is that the literary fact is something which is very central to sociology of literature as well. And here we draw about once you talk about a work of literature, you presuppose that there is a writer, there is a book, there's a reader, the writer and a product and a reader, and also basically the product is consumed by a public. But necessarily the text is a site where um, different kinds of meanings are produced. You know this. And the production of the text renders the author dead. I mean, the text is, because it is consumed by different kinds of people, the different kinds of um, meanings, significations, etc., are produced. And here the writer is no longer important. And the third kind of an approach, therefore, which says, which is more sociological in nature, is that intertextuality between texts. Intertextuality is an enduring process. Intertextuality is important for understanding texts, and it is intertextuality which produces meaning, works together. Texts rely on other texts, which may not belong to any particular discipline, and therefore it can productive collaboration. It can lead to the creation of a new object, and it does not necessarily sort of depend on any one particular, depend on either literature or sociology to make sense of what is being uh, what is being said in the text. Now, let me come to this context of how does one then read the social. So here I will talk about um, sociology of literature per se, um, and since I have not personally undertaken a sociology of literature, I will draw upon who works on ghost stories, and to show how ghost stories, Bengali ghost stories, mirror certain kinds of anxieties. So, but before that, let me um, talk about the relationship between sociology and literature a little bit. And here, um, one must sort of acknowledge that the sociological interpretation of literature is basically a field which is uh, marked by a degree of ambiguity because there is no firm structure. It is more like an amoeba flowing in different directions. And, as far as I mentioned earlier, and interpretation of organized social science. This is a quote by Leo Lowenthal, who is a Marxist scholar, because he says that literature is placed within the symbolic order, and literature is a discourse about society, but it is also um, as a product, it is placed within society, and because it is placed within this, because it is marked by empiricism. Questions of what kind of texts are to be chosen for analysis, um, how is it to be analyzed? Is it to be analyzed as the Marxist scholars would say, as a reflection of class interests, or is there some other method um, that can be chosen by sociologists to understand the literature? So the differences, while the differences are important, what is also important to emphasize is that uh, for a sociologist, performing a kind of an alchemy, performing um, a way in which to um, bring them together is something which is very challenging and important. And here, I, as Dr. Das Choudhury mentions, she says that literary texts can be read in multiple ways. There are differences in meaning that are internal to the text. But again, literature cannot be uh, construed as a mirror of the social. She says that the mirror metaphor is something which is inadequate. And this is a kind of a dilemma, because the mirror is something that does not always sort of um, reflect uh, the social in you know in quite adequately, because the mirror often the mirror can also misreflect. The mirror can, so what is important, misreflect in the sense that because literary texts and social reality are two different order of things, what binds them or what brings them together, or what is important uh, in understanding the connection between the literary text and the social is not that one reflects the other, but the fact that the context, the institutional context uh, in which this act is being undertaken. I will show it through an example, sort of talks about drawing from Bengali ghost stories. So the institutional and intellectual context of reflection is important. And what is important is the frame which brings both these contexts together. So she says, and I quote, "The sociology of literature requires the integration of text, institution, and the individual." Um, Mirroring may be a very the first act that a sociologist may fall back on or may resort to, but mirroring has its own limitations, because as I mentioned earlier, because these are two different order of things, it can also um, misreflect. So a sociologist has to um, perform a particular kind of a move from the private and the individual to the level of the social. Probably it will be clear if I give you an example. But what is important is, she says mediation is something which is more important. Now, mediation is a dialectical term for the establishment of relationships between different orders of things, different levels of reality, and it enables the sociologist to grasp the relationship between the formal analysis of a work of art, namely the literary text, and its social ground. A work of art, a literary texts are also, after all, work of art, and it sort of allows, if the mediation of, say, for example, history is brought in, it can very well um, offer a frame through which texts can be understood in relation to the social, or the social from the text can be gleaned. For example, I uh, go specifically to an example, and here, as you will note, when I read out the example, language performs a very important tool. So what this particular scholar does is to look at Bengali ghost fiction written between 1940 and 1980, arguing that ghost stories are like allegories of the psychic structures of the middle class Bengali every day. So the specific genre of ghost stories, um, you know, will sort of reflect, or which will show anxieties, fantasies about death, war, religion, technology, identity, etc. All these are sort of reflected. She tries to do this through looking at um, ghost stories. And ghost stories also transform the everydayness of one's existence, and allows uh, the sociologist to perform a particular kind of an alchemy. Now, let me, if you kindly allow me to read the uh, example. Now, this particular example is drawn from uh, a horror fiction titled Vibhishaner Jagoran, The Awakening of Vibhishan, published in 1943. So I'll just read some parts and then I'll come to the. So the translation is undertaken by the author herself, and tropes are used which will be clear soon. So I quote, "Deep into the night, by the grace of a blackout, humankind is ushered into blinding darkness." This is the text from the story. And icing on top is the dense Amavasya, showering a nocturnal blizzard. Not a single gas lamp is glowing in the streets of Kolkata, not a flicker to be found anywhere. High up in the sky, thousands of stars keep vigil on us. Kolkata has sunk now to the palpable blackness of the bowels of the earth, stiffening it into a black, inert rock. The numbing silence is only broken by the sound of babies whining in hunger behind closed window shutters, the footsteps of some night guard at the street crossing, or by the din of dog fights. No other signs of life exist. Close quotes. Now, the text carries a foreboding silence. People seem to have grown sixth senses. The world is painted in black with a sinister foreboding when no sane resident of Kolkata would dare to step out on the streets. There is a palpable sense of danger when the city puts on the garb of a ghost town. Now, amidst this, when the amateur detective duo Hemanto and Robin brush past a bloodthirsty lycanthropic demon, the premonition turns true. Mayhem strikes, and the darkness acquires a hue of violence. The contemplation of the starry sky as a backdrop to the blackout spreads a benediction of peace, destined to be corrupted by the bad infinity of violence. Now, this trope of blackout recurs in several stories in differing shades of darkness. pregnant with the sense of an impending violation. Blackouts, for instance, you know, Shield, a neurotic murderer in Ratri Jatri, published in 1941, a pilferer in the dark alleys in Blackouted Tragedy, 1943, and notorious dacoits in Bojro at Bhumikampo, published in 1943. But there is more ominous in the blinding darkness and the terror that it spells. Blackouts are metaphors of the unrepentingly continuing human catastrophes, the dread of an approaching war, the curse of ravenous greed, of speculative gains through through profiteering in food, the scourge of mass starvation and famines in 1943 and 44, Bengal famine, the black market and black death. The point is not that these the readers will find reflections of such tragedies in literary texts, but the ways in which these tragedies mediate at several levels: political, economic, and social. Similarly, in another story called Khuda, that is hunger, in 1947, old starves for 3 days and fights all odds, uh, basically ticketless travel in overcrowded train, scorching heat, torrential rain, and reaching his dream destination, that is the rice control shop, until he is hit by a motor. Manik blacks out and succumbs to a tardy death. His mother, Subhashi, receiving half his share from his friend Paresh, wastes no time in cooking and serving it to Manik's younger siblings. Manik reappears, basically, or his spectre does. He tiptoes in, dotingly asking Subhashi for a mouthful of rice. Pat comes the response from one of the siblings: "To hell with Dada. Once he returns, he will grab at our share. Let's finish off first." Chubashi too feels anxious and, casting a careful look around, begins to gulp down large helpings of rice. Actually, this is the real blackout, revealing the ugliness of hunger, as also a blanking out, an emptying of conscience, shedding a deathly livid light on life and living. The, the stories portray the unfeeling rich. In Bangla, uh, in Bengali, Kishore Sahitya, that is children's literature, the portrayal of the unfeeling rich who do not feel in any way ashamed or guilty of indulging in luxuries in the face of starving millions. Also, the middle classes, in their empathy for the wretched poor, hid their shame of being complicit in this treachery against them. So, what is being emphasized is an intertextual sort of reading, which can aid in further reflection. Uh, Representations of 1942 Bengal famine recurred in texts of this time. She
Ma'am,
says that
we have managed to share the screen. Um, so, you have any instructions on moving up, scrolling up? To which
yeah,
slide
this
do you
is
want
the.
her to?
I am just putting in some. Talking about the example, the last example on reading the social, where language is used as a tool in this process. The third or the fourth slide. It's a very short uh, kind of presentation. Presentation as in PPT, where I think it's the fourth slide. Uh, I'm explaining the last point in the fourth
Okay,
slide
ma'am.
and how it is sort of done. Uh, so basically, what is what is being attempted is that uh, these frames enable us to understand or to provide to create meaning about and tell us about the potential of texts to scrutinize history, basically to look at history. Now will you kindly go to the second last slide, which is sociology through literature. Now, this is another context. This is a context with which I am better acquainted, in the sense I studied the popular science movement for my um, doctoral work, and here uh, I looked at. I mean, I did an ethnography um, of a social movement, uh, and this involved studying documents as things, as social products, as a social product. Documents generally in social science research, documents have been used as containers of content and meaning. But as they are shared and consumed and transformed in different ways, they have come to be regarded as social products, social things, and um, they are today regarded as data in their own right. Now, this particular social movement, this is called the People Science Movement of Kerala. Um, this movement was undertaken in 1964, and it is still going on by scientists, science teachers, science writers, and the endeavor was um, to popularize science in the vernacular. So therefore, over a period of time, the movement has produced books, reports, magazines for children, for young adults, pamphlets, manuals, posters, campaign materials, bulletins, grammapatram, annual souvenirs, conference proceedings, discussion papers, and so on. So these production of texts at sort of different junctures and contexts um, allows us to understand the significance of these texts in the evolution of the popular science movement in Kerala. And this is what I was confronted with. Now, different genres of texts are produced with different purpose. Pamphlets, which are small in size, slim and low cost, were produced and circulated outside the organization. Say, for example, during a Vidyabhyas Yatra in 1995, which I walked, wherein I walked along with them. They were fighting against the privatization of education. Manuals for activists and Pravartana Rekhas were usually circulated within the organization at these cadre camps, Pravartana camps, where classes were organized for activists. Gramapatram usually gives an account of activities at the local level, produced by the local Parishad unit and pasted on the signboard at a corner in many local panchayats. Magazines for children, that is Eureka, was usually written in an informal style and organized around activities. Magazines for young adults, Shastra Keralam and Shastra Gati, have topical articles, Parishad's annual reports, the annual conference, posters and campaign materials were primarily used for publicity. They were unauthored, but they were circulated free of cost as the Jathas traveled across villages to disseminate the movement's point of view. So these documents are not only the products of a movement, they tell us a story about its past and lay out the possibilities of a movement's future. They are actors by themselves. They are active. I consider them as active agents trying to mediate social interaction. So therefore, documents also during in during different landmarks of the movement, different points of time. Documents are also crucial for the social movement because they also reshape the way in which its members think about a particular issue, how members think about the issue at large. Namely, the Kerala Education Commission report is a document that was produced by the movement, and it also established a link between um, the democratic quality and the educational process. So within the movement, it became a guide for action, for activists to think and talk about the state of education and society in Kerala. Similarly, documents are also documents that were used by the movement to um, discuss. If they were produced as a result of discussion, uh, they were produced to educate, they were produced from and uh, communicate their message. So therefore, an understanding of these documents is significant for acquiring a sense of growth of the movement. Documents also, I believe the document stand in a dual relation to the fields of action, namely uh, as a receptacle of instructions, commands, etc., and as an agent that is open to reading by several others, as an ally or a resource to be mobilized to further act. Now, these attempts tell us how texts are used for purposeful ends by the movement itself. The use of documents, participation in practices, collective reading and discussion by activists in camps enable an activist to become an expert of sorts. They could then train and talk to people about a vast range of issues like health, education, environment, low-cost technology, and development. As the texts performed manifold functions for the people science movement, they seem to acquire a cultural value of a different sort. The range of production of such texts within the movement tells us about the breadth of its engagement as well as the enormous investment that it has in the generation of such texts uh, in the course of its evolution. Therefore, a large part of the movement's identity work involves the production of texts, its circulation, and its documentation. Hence, these texts do not stand alone. The last slide, please. They do not stand alone. They have to be understood. Therefore, the ethnographies of social movements draw upon the practices of social movements. The content, production, and use of documents offer useful insights about the movement itself and hence have a role in the making of the ethnographies of a movement. And as far as the earlier context is concerned, what is important for us to understand is that any text uh, can be read in multiple ways, depending upon the time that it is speaking about, and also texts being open to interpretation by its readers allow allow for different polyphonic readings of the text. So, therefore, practicing a sociology of literature entails a degree of reflexivity on the part of the researcher. And it is not only about the skills of reading that one has to be conscious about. One also has to be conscious about gleaning the social through this practice of uh, intertextuality, to which what is within the text can be deciphered better. So therefore, both the text and the context is of significance. Society is itself a text, and there are several readings and interpretations that are possible by the reader, not only of the work of literature but of society at large. So the dialogue between the texts is of importance. The attention given to language is of importance as far as the uh, sociologist is concerned. I conclude my presentation. I'm sorry I took a lot of time.
Maybe we can, thank you so much, ma'am. We can have the next keynote and maybe take the questions later.
Yes, sure.
Yashika, you can invite the next speaker. Yeah. You ready, sir? Nilanjan, sir?
Yes, yes.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. Ma'am, can you please confirm? I guess we have 20 minutes for a presentation, right?
Um, yeah, we are at 6:50.
Yeah,
Can you
okay.
make it 15 if possible?
Yeah, sure.
Kind of scale it down, yeah? Because we
Yeah,
have one more paper to go. We
yeah,
usually close by 7:15.
yeah.
So
Okay,
we can give the last presenter 15 minutes at least. Yeah.
yeah, sure. So, so therefore, very briefly, thank you so much, first of all, for giving me the opportunity to present my thoughts in this area. So today I'm going to very briefly talk about myth as an important factor that goes into the that goes into the construction of social consciousness in literature. Now, for the first 3 or 4 minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background to myth criticism. So in the 20th century, if you see, there was a surge of critics who talked about myth as an important factor, as an important, as an important discipline in order to construct the social consciousness through literature. So Malinowski, for example, in his book Magic, Science and Religion and Other Essays in 1948, talks about myth as a part of a primitive psychology. And states that myth is basically a direct expression of human psychology in culture. So if we choose to go a bit further into this criticism, we will see that James Fraser, in his book The Golden Bough, which was published in 1922, as a very important book, because James Fraser says that the extension of the social anthropology is captured through the imaginative principles of myth. So Fraser, like Malinowski, worked as a field researcher of social anthropology, and his methodology was the same. He theorizes on myth and ritual after citing social practices from his own field work. Later on, after Malinowski and Fraser, we enter a very important theorist in the area of myth criticism, which is Carl Gustav Jung, who saw that myth is an expression of the collective unconscious of the people transmitted through social authority and universal images. Um, in fact, Jung came up with the very important idea of the archetypes, where he felt and where he theorized that the images that we find in the myths are basically cross-cultural, and therefore the myths that we see operating at different cultures and within different cultures are basically an expression of a collective unconscious of, thereby denoting the fact that human beings came from a very similar origin. um, we also see later on that Levi Strauss is a very important critic in myth criticism, and Levi-Strauss in his structural anthropology says that the myths can be broken down into their constituent parts, like the phonemes, morphemes, and semimes. And he states that the true constituent units of a myth are not the isolated relations, but bundles of such relations. And it is only as bundles that these relations can be put to use and combined so as to produce meaning. Now, I'll not go much into the myth criticism, beyond this, but let me go into the two authors that I propose to make a presentation about in this particular talk. The first being one of my favorite authors from Africa, Chinua Achebe. Now, Chinua Achebe, in books like in novels like Things Fall Apart and No Longer at Ease, uses myth as a main part of his textual narrative. Achebe's fiction engages in identity politics through the use of myths, and myths governed the social psyche of the Igbo and the Yoruba tribes until the colonial phase of their history, and until the colonial phase of their history erased out this memory. Like in almost all of the cultures, myths were part of an oral tradition. In fact, it is believed that Africa did not have a written language until the spread of Islam in the 8th and the 9th centuries across the Mediterranean. So, um, Achebe uses myth to make the statement that Africa is not a land of uncivilized savages, but rather it has its own indigenous cultures among the tribes. In the African pantheon of gods, for example, there is a large variety in their terminology as well as the functions they perform, deciding the fates of men. The myths vary from one tribe to the other, but there is a thematic link between those myths as well. For example, there is a Chukwu myth. Chukwu is the godhead and is believed to have created man in close communion with the sun. Apart from the Chukwu myth, um, there is also a very important part that I want to talk about, which is how Achebe uses myth as a part of not just the identity creation at the social level, but also at the individual level of the character. In Things Fall Apart, the novel starts at a personal crisis for its protagonist, Okonko. This is where myth plays a very important part in the construction of the characterization of Okonko, because Okonko has been delineated as a character who is very masculinist, and therefore he does not commit to any myths which talk about the gender fluidity of men, because Okonko is in perennial fear that he should not be identified like his father, who was rather considered as rather effeminate. As a result, what happens is that the myth criticism creates a social tension in the narratives of Chinua Achebe. Africa becomes a manifestation of myths, which are a rich heritage of social consciousness. But on the other hand, when the Europeans enter Africa, and this is what is seen in Things Fall Apart, that when the British enter the territory of Africa, especially in Nigeria, what is seen is that the British entered with their own system of myths and rituals. Therefore, in one of the occasions, we see that the son of Okonko, who is appropriated into into the church order, he kills a python. Now, a python is a very sacred animal among as far as the belief system in Nigerian Igbo tribe is concerned. But we know that in Christianity, the python, the snake, of course, is the symbol of the devil. So therefore, here what we see is that Okonko's son kills the python to prove that African myths are redundant in comparison to the myths presented by Christianity and the Bible. This is the way in which the Britishers create a penetration within the colonized space. So the colonizer uses myths in order to create his appropriation, his power domination over the colonized by making the myths of the Bible seem superior to that of the myths in the Igbo pantheon. Um, Therefore, the use of myth in the narrative of Chinua Achebe is extremely political. Now, there's another character whom I would like to briefly touch upon before I move into the last part of my presentation, which is the foster son of Okonkwo, Ikemefuna. The issue relating to Ikemefuna is that Ikemefuna is raised by Okonkwo as a truly masculinist character. But what we see is that Ikemefuna is being killed by the tribe, by his own tribe, because he is seen as a sacrifice that will create the betterment of the tribe, and Okonkwo does nothing to stop that killing, because Okonkwo believes that if he stops the killing of his foster son, then he will be seen as effeminate, and that will go against the masculinist principles that Okonkwo stands for. As a result, myth over there has been used as a principle to forward the personal psychological agenda of Okonkwo to represent himself as highly masculinist. In fact, Achebe also introduces us to the concept of chi, which is which is a principle of collective social destiny. Achebe states that in Igbo there are two distinct meanings of chi, one related to gods or supernatural beings, and the other related to the transitional periods between the daytime and nighttime. So chi ofufo means daybreak, and chi ojiji means nightfall. So chi is essentially is personal chi in the other world, and no two persons can have the same chi. So therefore, chi becomes a very important part in providing the social analysis of myths in the novels of Achebe. Now, for the lack of time, I will move into the last part of my presentation, which is, of course, the novel of Amitav Ghosh. I can't, of course, talk about all the novels of Amitav Ghosh, but I will talk about only one novel, which is The Hungry Tide. And Amitav Ghosh over there uses the myth of, of the bone baby over there in order to create the social reality, the social identity of the Sundarbans. For those who do not know about Bengal, Sundarbans, as you know, is the southernmost part of West Bengal, and that is where we have the mangrove forests where the land meets the sea. So what we see is that in The Hungry Tide, Amitav Ghosh includes the myth of Bon Bibir Johuranama, which is a text that was printed in some of the some of the unofficial presses of 19th century Bengal. Bon Bibi Johuranama, talks about the story of a little boy called, Dukhe, who is left all alone in the forest by a quote unquote evil man called Dokhin Rai. And then that boy Dukhe is saved by the goddess Bon Bibi, who ironically comes from Persia. Now, it's very interesting that Bon Bibi actually is the mother goddess for the people. That is, she represents that space of the forest which is inhabited by the people, whereas Dokhin Rai represents that part of the forest which is inhabited by the tigers. So essentially, Amitav Ghosh talks about the myth from a very environmental perspective, because here what we see is that the feud between Dokhin Rai and Bon Bibi is essentially the feud between man and tiger. And in the forests, we know that there is a constant tussle between the man and the animal space because they are at loggerheads with each other. So therefore, the Bon Bibi Johuranama, as is presented by Amitav Ghosh in the novel Hungry Tide, is basically presented from the perspective of environmental consciousness, where where the space of Bon Bibi must be protected, as well as the space of Dokhin Rai must be protected as well, for the man tiger conflict to end. The symbolic association between the forest and the religion of the myth itself is very important as well, because Bon Bibi is envisaged as a Muslim woman who comes from Persia, and yet she is the mother goddess not just for the Muslims in Sundarbans but also the Hindus of the Sundarbans, because both the Hindus and the Muslims are, subjected to the same threat, which is the tigers. And therefore the character Kanai, who happens to be a Hindu, prays to Bon Bibi, but uses terms like Allah and the other terms which are used by the Muslim by the Muslim prayer speakers. So therefore the Bon Bibi myth actually talks about the religious integration of Sundarbon, because the Bon Bibi is the protective mother for both the Hindus and Muslims alike. The Hindu Islam syncretism in the narrative of Bon Bibi is crucial to the understanding the way culture functions in the Sundarbans. Pokir, who is a very important character in the novel, emblematizes its cultural psyche and being in the boat, because Pokir, as I said, prays. And this is what he prays: in Allah's name, I begin to pronounce the word of the whole universe. He is the begetter, the Lord of all his disciples. He is full of mercy above the created world. Who is there but he? And the last part that I want to mention over here is that the Bon Bibi myth has a very important representation through the local plays, because the local plays, in Bangla they call them jatra, which is basically a very informal way of staging plays. Now these informal plays, which are kind of represented through the stage, these plays actually represent the glory of Bon Bibi, and therefore the glory of Bon Bibi actually talks about the myth history continuum, because the myth history continuum not just talks about the past of the past, but it also talks about the presentness of the past. So even though Bon Bibi happens to come from the past, and even though she comes from the time past, yet she is the one who also protects the forests, the people from the terror of the tigers. So I would conclude my talk over here by saying that the myth history continuum, is represented by the Bon Bibi myth, which has a certain tiger cult at its interface. The tiger cult is so much of a practice in the region that when a tiger really appears on the scene, there is widespread fear not only of an attack by a carnivore, but also of an attack by Dokhin Rai, which seems to challenge the superiority of Bon Bibi every time such a dreadful event occurs. The intrusion of a tiger in human space is a terrible omen that needs to be dealt with through a physical counterattack as well as through rituals to please the tiger goddess. Kanai and Pia visit a locality where a tiger has entered, and Pia can feel the atmosphere of dread and insecurity among the people. So therefore the insider outsider dialectics is very important, as we see that the tigers are not only a very palpable physical presence in the region, but they also provide a kind of a historical myth continuum, and therefore the people use myths and rituals to counter the attack of the tigers, to counter the dread of the tigers, to present a certain continuum between society, myth, and lived realities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Now, let me invite the paper presenter, Dr. Prabhat Jha, to present his paper on migration in Maithili literature.
Good evening, everyone. Is my screen visible? I think it is visible. So, I'll start with the aim of research, which is basically to show whether migration during globalization transformed the earlier rules of domination in rural Mithila through literary representations, and to find out how literary narratives subverted the hegemonical dominance of caste, and to deconstruct the master slave narrative within the context of migration and globalization. So, of course, migration is a topic that is talked about in many different ways. But in Maithili literature, it has not been discussed much in specifically in English study circles. Now, what I wanted to talk about is the major sources of this work, this research paper. Three short stories that I have taken from Maithili that has been translated into English. These are Kailas Mandal's Philip Radio by Ramesh, and then which was translated by Bhairaveswar Jha. Then Anti-Current by Ashok, translated by Sanjeev Kumar Choudhury, and A Woman of Character by Shiv Shankar Srinivas, translated by Tanushree Choudhury. The first two are based in 90s and were published in 90s, and the last one was based in the 2000s. So we can see that there is a period of globalization that started in the 80s and 90s that can be reflected in these works, and how from an agrarian society globalization started to influence the Maithil society, and in within Maithil society, how it kind of influenced the marginal castes. So that is the basic idea. But the history of migration in Maithili is not quite contemporary. It has a long history of migration. Maithil scholars of high ambition undertook perilous journeys to distant lands to find out liberal patterns, but most of them were Brahmins, and marginal castes were not really educated enough, so they couldn't really break away from the bondage labor that was going on, and they were not able to migrate during the earlier periods. But when there was this economic growth that happened, of course, due to the green revolution in 50s and 60s, and also industrial revolution that happened, in the north specifically, there were a lot of migration from Bihar and specifically from Mithila also, of semi-skilled and unskilled laborers who broke away from that no dynamics of master and slave related to caste to go to these places. Then, of course, there are other reasons for migration, like vast damage of crops. We know that there is a lot of flooding that happens in due to the Kosi River in North Bihar region. Then agriculture was not profitable enough, or there were a lack of employment opportunities. Specifically, you know how Bihar is not really industry savvy, or there are not enough industries in Bihar. So that is why a lot of migration happened, and people went to, of course, north of India, like Punjab, Haryana. Earlier they used to go to Kolkata, but later on people went to Punjab and Haryana, and of course later on, because of industrial revolution, they went to Delhi specifically, and Gujarat. No? So what I wanted to talk about is the idea of master and slave. Now, master and slave is an idea that was discussed most prominently by Hegel in Phenomenology of Spirit, lecture 5, the slave master dialectic. Now, he talks about the struggle between two independent self-consciousness who are in a life and death conflict. In the conflict, one of them wins, and that becomes a master. The master doesn't realize his dependence on the slave, as the slave is producing things for the sustenance of the master. Realizes his dependence on the master. He thinks of himself as an object in this process. through his enslavement, the slave has established his dignity and validated his life by becoming fully aware of his place in the world. But master is not able to understand his role as a master. But in the end, ultimately, the master realizes his dependence on the slave. This whole phenomena is called double self-consciousness. Each individual is aware of what it is in itself and relation to other. So this master-slave dynamic or binary is understood by the slave in a much more prominent way. Of course, the term slave later on changed to servant, and then now, though, I mean, of course, we know that these terms are not used in terms of, global world, but these are terms that are still persisting in a different terminology, in different terminologies. Talking about the history of slavery in Mithila, uh, during the ancient period, the lands of Shudras were grabbed by the upper caste of Mithila. In History of Mithila, Upendra Thakur writes, in the name of Yagna and Danam, these brahmachari masses and gradually grabbed the vast lands brought into cultivation by the Vaisya Shudra tillers. They lost the struggle. Of course, I mean, if you talk about the master and slave struggle, the upper caste win the struggle. And that is why they didn't really have any land, and they were kind of subjugated and exploited by the upper caste of Mithila. Later on, this is something which is again related to that, and this is written in even in the religious works as well, thinking of Sudra to be the servant of another, to be expelled at will and to be slain at will. He had no rights of property or right against Kshatriya or the king. Again, in the medieval period, also the same situation was there. And in the modern period, as I said, the term slavery was not used or was not really propagated. But of course, the term servant and then later on other terms were mentioned. But the relationship between master and the servant was the similar one. Of course, Ambedkar is well known to talk about abolishing slavery, and it is disgraceful to life at the cost of one's self-respect. Self-respect is a more vital factor in life, according to Ambedkar. Now, all these theories and ideas I would like to talk about in the context of these three short stories. The first one being Kailas Mandal's Phillips Radio by Ramesh. And in this work, we see Kailas Mandal's father, Rodhi Mandal, was swept away during the floods. They were Shudras, of course. And there is a system called Khabasi system. By this means that in the multiple generations of a family, the specifically in terms of caste, we can call them OBCs, and Dusad and other, there was different castes that belonged to OBCs. They used to work in the households of Maithil Brahmins, and for generations, the child of the servant would be working in the household of the child of the master. So that whole tradition has been going on and still going on for the longest period of time in the village households, where the masters are Brahmins and the servants are belonging to OBC category. Of course, because Dalits were not allowed to do any kind of contact work. So that is why they were mostly being servants. So now what Kailas Mandal did was to ban servants and going to Punjab for working. But Bauwa Jha, his master, of course, he couldn't tolerate that and was very harsh on Kailas's mother. Kailas didn't like to be a servant in the Haveli in the modern times. Of course, now he's aware of the different possibilities of work. Of course, he's working in Punjab, so he's working as an agricultural worker. But still, he doesn't really want to be in this village because of caste subjugation. He couldn't take a break after work he could take a break after work in Punjab, but not in village. So here he is a kind of a property of Bauwa Jha, no, as a slave of Bauwa Jha, kind of a slave of Bauwa Jha. and he has no freedom in his village. Whereas in Punjab, he can work for certain hours, and then his time would be his own, and he would be free to do anything that he wants to do. His mother used to go to clean the utensils in Haveli. Kailash stopped her from going there, which angered Bhua Jha. Now he kind of confronted this whole idea of slavery, and his radio was taken away because of 500 rupees loan, and he was humiliated as well. Now this, he tried to kind of have to be free from this caste-based discrimination and kind of slavery that was going on. But although the condition in Punjab was not great, but still in the end we see that he's not able to migrate. No, so he becomes the plowman again. So we can see that although he's trying to break away from this master-slave binary, it's not as if this industrial revolution or globalization has made it possible for them to do that. Of course, I mean, in terms of economic changes that have happened, even the global companies or industries are not like really empathetic towards the workers. But still, I mean, the slaves or the servants think that at least there is no direct control of any person on them. The master is not visible as much as they are visible in the villages, and also caste subjugation is lesser. Of course, caste is a very important aspect in terms of marginalization of working class as well, but not as much as in the villages. Now, another work is Anti-Current by Ashok. He also talks about another khabas, no servant, which is Arjun, and he is very much he's still a young boy, so he's not aware about these ideas about no going away, being free. He feels kind of doing everything that is demanded by his master. Now, domins were not allowed, but Khabasins, who belong to again this OBC category, were allowed to do that. In the new global world, Khabasi system was challenged by a lot of people belonging to that category, and they thought that it is demeaning to work in these places, these homes, but still they worked because there was no other way. Now we again see that Arjun in the narrative was mocked by others because they were very much aware of this idea that the difference between slavery and working somewhere else, breaking away from that whole dynamic. Arjun is mocked by other youngsters as Baua's property. No, this is kind of objectification, and and of course this is objectification and dehumanization of Baua, of Arjun, that is done, and it's not the idea of they're telling about these things, but also the reality of his existence as well. Now, what happens is that he gets his tongue cut due to eating pan, and one of the boys asked Baua to change his tongue. Now, Bhua Jha, he becomes really angry with that comment, and he took it as a challenge given by someone from the lower caste, that you change his tongue because his tongue is cut due to eating pan. So this whole idea of Baua becoming the master and Arjun being the slave, and a slave who is dehumanized and objectified is challenged by this whole narrative. We can see that. Again, I mean, there are other characters who are living in Delhi. They object to there is a tradition of gifting slaves, which is written in the earlier ancient texts as well, in the Maithil Brahmin households. But of course, now things have changed, so they cannot really do it directly. So they give money instead of that. So people who are living in Delhi, they challenge this whole they object to this whole tradition of gifting slaves, but nobody listens to them. And the dominant person, again, who is Bhua Jha, he says he thinks that all traditions are being ruined. These people will destroy everything. He kept thinking. So he therefore he they were not able to do anything. Now, Indrajit Roy writes, in almost all cases, actual potential migrants indicated that they knew their migration was temporary, but it helped them lead dignified lives. Seeking employment outside the village reduced their dependence on local employers and provided them an opportunity to dissolve caste relations in the village. Now, what was the impact of globalization? In terms of economic impact, we don't see that much of a change in the marginal caste. The landowning classes were again still the upper castes, and then the multinational companies came and they started owning land. So, in terms of the marginal caste, they were not really getting any of the benefit of globalization in terms of land. No, so because that is very important in if you want to economically become independent, so you need to have land or some property for doing that. But that didn't happen. Even with all the constitutional, legal, or statutory provisions for removal of discrimination and atrocities, occurrence of violent incidents is rampant against Dalit. In Bihar, we see again, people going to Punjab and Haryana, and most of these people belonging to the OBC, EBC, and Mahadalit categories. Now, the third work, which is based in 2005, around 2005, this is called A Woman of Character by Shiv Shankar Srinivas. Anjani Devi went to workers' colony to teach kids, and she belongs to the rural area. She goes to live with her children, her son and daughter-in-law, and she is feeling really lonely. So she goes to worker colony, and she started teaching these kids who belong to her region, for example. So she went to these places, but that angered her son, and she didn't really want to. They didn't really want her to go there. But their son, I mean her grandson, told them that he is researching on these workers, and she has become really a big name in USA, because she is one of the lady who is he says, I am getting all the prestige because I am the grandson of a great woman like her. Father, these days everything is up for sale. Since you are the son of Anjana Devi, the marketing of your company can rise on account of her. So this woman who is doing some kind of social service is going to become beneficial for the marketing of the son. And the grandson also thinks that this is going to impact his career in a better way because of his grandmother. Now, what has happened now is that this whole idea of caste has changed its shape, and casteism is not that kind of prominent or seen, but it has become a little kind of opaque. No, it's not really directly shown in many places. Even in terms of human rights agencies, we see a dominance of upper caste there. Like, for example, Karthik wrote, aid agencies securing benefits in the name of Dalit Adivasis and delegitimizing the valid claims of the very same Dalits and Adivasis in their institutional space, while talking about their neutrality and meritocracy. So, I mean, we can see that the subaltern is not really allowed to speak, but the narrative about the subalterns are set by these people who claim to empathize and belong to the human rights associations, but are belonging to the upper caste, and not everyone, but I mean, it is written by many people. So, I mean, we can kind of there is some truth to it, that they are narrating these stories in a different way, in a much more polished, or I mean, there is no take of subaltern in these stories. Now, Frederick Jameson talks in his work Postmodernism or the Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism, talks or criticizes late capitalism to be a place where people get alienated and they lose a sense of location. No, so in order to locate themselves and this alienation from their culture, they should be going back to the memory of their culture, their location, their no local place. But in terms of caste subjugation, when you are going back to that local place, denying all the kind of changes that has happened during the late capitalist period, you are not going to a pleasant memory. No, you are going to a memory of subjugation. You are going to a memory of domination. No, so here alienation from one's root is liberating in a sense, of course not economically, but in sense of mostly psychologically, that you are not, the caste domination is not as much as it would be in a rural place. No, however, globalization is another form of exploitation which is much more complex and indirect. So in the end, the marginal communities have not been able to break the master-slave binary. And although the globalization has not eradicated this exploitation, but exploitation comes in a new form where we do not know who is exploiting us. So although the binary has not been broken, but at least the master is not seen or is not really on your neck. No, that is the kind of difference that has happened. And so I mean, we can say that from the pre-modern or to the late capitalist economies, the attempt has been to break this master-slave binary. But in the end, as we can also see in the three short stories, that binary has not been broken. No, it is still there in a different form. So that is my presentation. I worked for on this particular topic for the first time. So I'm looking forward to your comments. Thank you.
Dr. Prabhat, Mr. Prabhat Jha, I didn't think it was your first presentation. It was very, very comprehensive and very good. We learned about a whole lot of communities from that particular region through your short stories, though we haven't read those. Yes, very good it was. And the other, for the Dr. Nilanjan and I think Dr. Shoma Choudhury set the tone for the, I mean, you gave an overview. Thank you for having given an overview of the whole thing so that the others have followed. I mean, though they've taken small parts from it today, I mean, that's a very wide topic,
Thank you,
and
ma'am.
you were able to bring it all together there. And I think it was packed. It was very, very packed. Dr. Nilanjan Chaudhury, I think, made very pointed examples. He tried to keep to the time, yet it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you. We learned a lot today.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement with Srividya ma'am. Thank you, Nilanjan sir. Thank you, Prabhat sir. Very, very nice and presentation, Shoma madam. Um, if I missed a point, could you elaborate on Maithili, the word Maithili?
From Mithila.
Mithila, sorry, Mithila.
From the
Okay.
word
Region.
Mithila is Maithili. Maithili literatures from the
Yeah,
place.
that's what. Okay.
So Mithila is the region which is North Bihar region, and I mean in mythology you might be knowing about Mithila in the terms of Sita. No, it is
Yeah,
the
that's
place.
what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yes, and Mithila is also her other name. But of course, Mithila is not a state. It is a part of Bihar now. And I mean, we can say that in Nepal also there is a region of where a lot of Maithils are there. So we don't have any state or any such thing.
I was thinking
And
Maithili
Maithili is
Bhasha,
the
Braj Bhasha,
language,
we
which
learnt
is
all those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
So yeah, Maithili is the language, and it has a long history. I mean, about 700-800 years of history, at least in written form, and in oral form, much beyond that.
Is it very akin to the modern Hindi?
I mean, it is
Maithili?
written down in Devanagari. We used to have a script called Mithilaksha, but I mean, nobody really writes in that. Now, in the early part of 20th century, they started writing in Devanagari much more prominently, rather than in Mithilaksha. Mithilaksha is very much similar to Bengali script, very much
Yes,
similar.
it is very close to
Located
Bengali
the
script.
stories
So the
written.
first two are located in 1990s,
Okay.
And yes, and the later one, the woman of character is located in around 2015. Okay. Yes.
That's why he brings in globalization also, no?
Yes.
So
Into
they
it.
write in
So
Maithili, is it? Is it the regular? Is it Maithili type of Hindi, or what type of language?
Maithili is a language. It came much before Hindi.
Yeah.
But what happened? Yes, but what happened is that the script was discontinued. No, it was not continued by the writers because of. I mean, we go into the politics of it. I mean, the Darbhanga king, Darbhanga Maharaj, who was also a Brahmin, he sided with the Hindu Mahasabha and nationalist movement. So he promoted writing of Maithili in the Devanagari script. So that is why people and the printing press and everything that they started to publish Maithili work in Devanagari rather than Mithilaksha. So I mean now nobody is really writing in Mithilaksha, so everyone is writing in Devanagari. But it is a language. It's not a dialect of Hindi. It's a different language. There is a poet called Vidyapati. No?
Hindi literature,
Yes.
we read that he wrote in Maithili. Yeah,
Yes,
right.
yes. He wrote in Maithili, long time back, and Jyotirishwar. And then, there is a poet called Nagarjun, writer called Nagarjun, and he is also known in Hindi literature as well. He wrote poems and short stories. And now, in the last 50 years, the most dominant form of genre in Maithili literature is short stories. So, and specifically if you talk about 80s and 90s and 2000s, that these short stories became more popular. Unfortunately, there is not enough translation that is happening. I have translated some of them, but it's not enough. And so that is why the material on which we can work to talk about different issues is very limited in terms of that. A lot of people want to research on them, but there is a lot of limitation of translations in from Maithili to English. No? Hindi there has been, but Maithili to English is very less. There is a book. This is a book. No? I have taken couple of short stories from this one. This has been published by Sahitya Academy in 2005.
I've
Contemporary
seen, I've seen
Maithili short
this.
stories.
Well done, sir. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Shoma, for that, that overview. Actually, that you set the pace and the tone and tenor for today's deliberations.
Took a lot of time. I'm really sorry I took a lot of time. I didn't realize that. I knew that there were three speakers, but I sort of spoke for such a long time. I'm really sorry.
It's
The other
okay. And
speakers
I
for.
couldn't send you a reminder because I was trying to figure out how to share your PPT. So that was doing it. That's
Yeah.
okay, ma'am.
Today, all of you are from Bengal. Are you,
No, I am
Mr.
from
Jha,
Patna.
from Patna?
You're
Ah,
from
right.
Patna. You're from Bengal
I'm
one.
originally from Mithila, Madhubani, but Patna is in south of Bihar. But I've stayed, throughout my life in Patna.
And how come you learned this language?
It is my mother tongue.
Oh, right.
Oh, okay.
And one of the works that I've mentioned, Anti-Current, that has been written by my father. He is a well-known Maithili writer. So I'm read a lot of Maithili literature, but this is for the first time that I'm working on it, in English.
Actually, to be honest, I don't know much about your area to be, to engage in a discussion with you, but I think I will after I learn more.
Yeah.
I think
You
we've
know,
got to
if
read the Sahitya Academy translations. That book I
Yes.
have already seen. So,
And
actually it has
Sahitya
to.
Academy, what Sahitya Academy is doing for voices is another topic.
yeah.
Actually, the languages, voices from different languages to be heard, languages of India, lesser known languages.
Yeah, they hold this workshop in 2004 or something, where there were about 25 translators and the writers who came together under the same institute. And my father was one of the organizers, and they worked on the translations together, and this is the result of that translation,
Wow.
that workshop.
Okay.
So it's very kind of unique in a way now to have 25 writers and 25 translators or lesser. I mean, there are a few works that have been translated by the same translator to come together under the same house or institute and translate by collaborating with each other. Because sometimes what happens, we are working alone as a translator, we don't know the actual context of a particular term, specifically in terms of culture. So it is a very kind of a unique way, I think. I mean, of course, it must have happened in other places as well, but that is how this work was produced. So I know a little bit about the history of this that work.
Actually, I want to thank all three presenters because we have our audience is mainly postgrad students. In terms of the values that we are giving, Sir talked about caste and Nilanjan about Born BB, where we need to uphold our values of secularism. Born BB is one mythical character who is endearing and appealing to us in terms of the secular fabric that we need to uphold. So thank you for focusing on Born BB. I mean, bringing in Born BB. And so yes,
No, it was
yes,
discussed once, but in another context.
yeah,
The same book and Bond BB was discussed in detail, but in a totally different context. It was man and environment or something like that.
yeah.
Uh,
Shreya wants to say something.
uh,
Hi, Shreya.
I
Thanks for bringing in all the speakers for today.
and then I myself really enjoyed this session. It was a real cerebral treat
Mm,
listening to all three of you. I just have one question for Nilanjan, more of an observation. Nilanjan, I think in Things Fall Apart, it is not Navoe, Okonkwo's son, but rather Enoch, who is rumored to have killed the python, which I think brings in another dimension which Shoma would appreciate. That is, basically, it is a convert from the outcast of Igbo society, that is the Osu, who takes this drastic step. So you see, the if the foundational myths of Igbo society are being challenged by the Christian world, then that is not being challenged by what should I say, a born Christian, but rather by a convert from one of the outcasts. So like, as Shoma was talking about the various, it is not one reality. There are different planes of reality, and how we mediate and negotiate, that becomes more important, I think.
Yes.
Just to add one something to you, Shreya, is that all the two presenters, the people who came after me, I see all their interventions as very sociological. While
Yes.
while the presentation by Professor Nilanjan Chakraborty was spoke about through the author, spoke about the societies, the myths, the changes, the challenges. In Professor Prabhat Jha's writing, this is something that I have not read the stories, of course, but what I teach in my class is a section called linguistic movements, where the Maithili movement for recognition of Maithili, and the issues involved, the issues of caste, and the issue of democratization of public sphere. All these things come in, and initially, the movement was dominated by the Brahmins, but later on, challenges were also have been seen in terms
Mhm.
of claiming a space in this new kind of public sphere that the Maithili people were creating. So for me, it brought in different kind of resonance. So thank you, Dr. Jha and Dr. Chakraborty, for the presentation. I really enjoyed. I could connect it to what I teach in class. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that leads leads me to what Chinua Achebe had said. He always mentioned that what he wants to do, what he wants to create is socially committed art. You know, uh, art for art's sake was not what Achebe spoke about. He always stressed this. So as a sociologist, obviously, it it it, it resonates. And that is the interface that we need to explore more, negotiate more. I think.
Yes, yes, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you for it, Shreya.
Thank you. I would like to thank you, Shoma and Nilanjan and Prabhat, for accepting this invitation. You really, really made a difference. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for two other professors also, Professor Sugatan, Professor Srinivasan, for this opportunity. Thank you. It was enriching for me too.
Wind up for today. Where is
We can wind up, Yashika.
yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Who's-
We have come to the end of this session. I deem it an honor to propose the vote of thanks. I thank our keynote speakers, Dr. Shoma Choudhury Lahiri, Assistant Professor of Sociology, St. Xavier's College, and Dr. Nilanjan Chakraborty, Assistant Professor of English, Panchla Mahavidyalaya. I thank our college for sharing their valuable insight on literature and sociology. I thank our college principal for her constant support. Our heartfelt thanks to Dr. Maria Priti Srinivasan, Associate Professor and Head Department of English, for providing this research forum for the scholars. I would like to thank our paper presenter, Dr. Prabhat Jha, Assistant Professor of English, Patna Women's College, for sharing his ideas on literature and sociology. Once again, I thank all the staff members and research scholars who are present at this forum. Thank you all. We will meet again on 19 April 2024 with the topic Interdisciplinary Studies, Literature and Anthropology. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yashika. You did a very great job.
Thank you, ma'am.
If you can put your video on there, we can see you. Yashika is only a second BA student. She's done